Hello, Gamecock fans. I'm Spencer Ball.
And I'm JP Barry. Welcome to Ball Don't Lie, SGTV's premier live sports show.
JP and I will be giving you our weekly insight every Sunday.
This week on the show, a week full of upsets in college football.
And later, college football playoffs, college basketball, and the Carolina Panthers.
Be sure to stick around for head-to-head pick'ems.
And without further ado, welcome to Ball Don't Lie.
Welcome to the Kennedy Greenhouse Studio.
I'm Spencer Ball.
And I'm JP Barry.
This is the one where there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer.
I'm always the get-back game guy.
There's so many teams with so many good wins.
Because, they love seeing Clemson lose no matter what.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that love seeing Clemson lose.
Yeah,
Return of the King released 20 years ago today. There you go. And for that reason, give me the Noles.
I like being right more than I like being happy.
I think the committee made the right choice.
Florida State did not lose a football game. It's football. This is college football. How can you not be romantic about baseball? It's just such a tremendous sport.
It's time. Is it time?
I think it's time.
This is Ball Don't Lie.
Last night, the Gamecocks pulled off a massive upset at home against formerly number 10 Texas A&M. Spencer, the Gamecocks notching just their second win against the Aggies ever.
Oh, we dropped them down a couple spots. It was a great game all around for South Carolina, especially pulling away at the end. Pitching a shutout in the second half. This defense, it did exactly what they were billed as in the second half, just wreaking havoc. But the offense really stepped up, 44 points.
Well, the run game stepped.
The run game, but also the passing game, I think it was manageable. It actually did show up. Again, South Carolina's not a team that's going to air raid you to death, but they'll wear you down up front, and they really did a great job. And although Lenore Sellers, his escapability from the pocket had a lot to do with this, the team let up 0 sacks.
Yeah, no, that was huge. We were there. We went on the field after the game. We had a great time.
Couple branches.
Yeah.
It was a great environment. Texas A&M, I don't want to say they weren't ready for it, but something just kind of felt off,
Well, the first half they were good, but then the second half adjustments, they could not adjust to what South Carolina was putting out there in the second half. And that's kind of the limitation that you might run into with a young quarterback like Marcel Reed.
Yeah, and South Carolina, I think, to their credit, made a lot of changes in the second half. Defensively, they looked a lot sharper, were wreaking a lot more havoc. Marcel Reed was having to do more with his legs, which I think was good for them in the first half, but in the second, the Gamecocks really made it a lot harder for him to throw on the run.
Yeah, exactly. And, the defense was holding up in the back end as well, like on those broken play when they would scramble around. And, sometimes maybe someone gets open. That happened a lot less in the second half, especially as time went on. And that interception on the sideline, we couldn't even really tell from where we were sitting, but I think it was DQ Smith.
No, it was O'Donnell Fortune.
O'Donnell Fortune.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's the man.
It was very special. That was the moment I was kind of like, oh my God.
And if that pick six had counted, still the place blew up. It was crazy. It did get called back, but the interception stood. But that was a huge moment. And again, the defense stepped up. And we're not surprised. But moving forward, this week has a ton of high-intensity games. We picked 6 like we usually do to talk about today. JP, let's start it off.
Yeah, starting with, maybe the biggest game of the entire weekend with Ohio State versus Penn State. The Buckeyes trailed 10-0 early after a pick 6 thrown by Will Howard, but they outscored the Nittany Lions 20-3 the rest of the way and took advantage of another James Franklin disaster class in a big-time game.
We watched the Penn State when they had first and goal from, I think, the 3 or 4.
Chance to take the lead, Spencer. It's down 17-13.
A massive, massive chance for Penn State. And in typical Penn State fashion, they say, you know what, let's run the ball up the middle 3 straight times after it failed. And then it failed again. And it failed again. And they're like 4th and goal, and they drop back to pass. All their actions headed to the same spot on the field. It's an incomplete pass. It was horrific to watch. Penn State dropped to number 6. Should have dropped to number 60. Their defense is good, but their offense is sacrilegious to football.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about them anymore. We'll move on to number 5, Miami,
I don't want to
who trailed 31-28 to Duke, but then ripped off, 25 unanswered points to defeat the Blue Devils 53-31 at home.
They trailed 28-17 at one point, too. Their defense actually stepped up when it mattered most, only allowing 3 points since that mark. And Cam Ward, threw for 400 yards and 5 scores. So he's just He's a heck of a player.
He is. He had some interesting moments where he kind of put the ball in harm's way unnecessarily. Maybe the worst interception I've ever seen.
Yeah. Him running to the sideline, full turning around, crossbody throw, just kind of up in the air. And wouldn't you know it, it got picked off. So that was a bit silly, but Miami kind of comfortably pulled away at the end. Moving on, we've got Pitt at SMU, and I think we thought this one would be closer. SMU just came out, shot out of a cannon. So they win 48-25, and I mean, it was 31-3 at one point.
It was bad. I mean, we were at the Gamecock games. We didn't get a real chance to watch this one live. I catched up on some, post-game recaps and stuff like that, and Pitt just did not, from the get-go, they were just not ready to play, I don't think. It was upsetting. I mean, I thought this Pitt team was good. I mean, not to say they're not good, but I thought that they were better than what they showed on Saturday.
Yeah,
exactly.
Better, yeah.
SMU, on the other hand, they just remain very good. I mean, still perfect in ACC play. They've only lost to BYU, who joined the top 10 this week at number 8.
I'm a Mustang enjoyer, man. I mean,
Kevin Jennings has really turned their team around. Staying in the ACC, though, maybe the best game of the day was Virginia Tech blowing a 21-3 second-half lead to Syracuse in the Carrier Dome.
On a CW network.
Yeah, it was a fun game to watch. Syracuse came back and won 38-31 in overtime, Spencer. This one was a good one.
It really was, and I think a big turning point for Virginia Tech was Drones, of course, going down and getting injured. And, you really hate to see that because it would have made it a little bit more fun if they had their starting quarterback. But again, Syracuse, a big comeback win, and I believe they qualified for bowl eligibility. They did. They moved 6 games.
They moved to 6-2. Meanwhile, for Virginia Tech, they fell to 5-3. It would have been a big time, or I think it actually 5-4. That would have been a big time win with a big game on deck this weekend.
We'll get to that later.
Yeah, and we will. But staying in with the South general area, Syracuse not really South, but they're in the ACC. Georgia had another weird game where no one ever really thought they'd lose, mainly because DJ Lagway got hurt for Florida, but they also just did not look impressive at all.
And going into the season, Carson Beck, I think, was the Heisman favorite, or second in Heisman voting. I don't know what screams NFL about this guy to anyone. I don't see it at all. I don't know if it's Mike Bobo. I mean, he's bounced around about 15 SEC teams. For some reason, he still has a job.
Or not having Brock Bowers.
Yeah, whatever it is, he does not look good sometimes. He just throws the ball to the other team.
And it's awful. It'll be off his back foot, right into the waiting arms of a middle linebacker. It's bizarre. And truthfully, I mean, it came back to bite him against Alabama, but it very well could come back to bite him again.
And Georgia's played in a lot of close games, and I think they're lucky to have only come out with 1 loss on the season. But the final game we're going to talk about was Louisville at Clemson, picking up a huge win on the road, 33-21. But this one was a little bit more lopsided than the score says.
Well, it's funny because it's almost a year to the day. That was almost a step-by-step retelling of Louisville versus Notre Dame from a year ago. It starts out low scoring. It's 17-7 at halftime in Clemson. It was 7-7 in the Notre Dame-Louisville game. And then the second half starts, and Notre Dame still can't move, or Clemson still can't move the ball. They end up
Sounds like you're reliving a trauma here.
At some point, I turned the game off and turned to something else. But for Clemson, they could never get the ball rolling until it was too late. And they just when Louisville got it, man, they just moved it. They marched it into Clemson territory relentlessly. Yeah, they were held for field goals, but eventually the dam broke on a long touchdown run, and it was too deep of a hole for Clemson to climb out of.
Yeah, and they couldn't really score the ball until the 4th. They had a touchdown early, but outside of that, I mean, this was the Cards' game to lose, and they just
And for a team that's had so many, I mean, they barely lost to SMU at home. They barely lost on the road against Notre Dame. They barely lost to Miami. They have played some of the best teams in the country so close. It feels good for Jeff Brom and company, I think, to win this one.
Yeah, and I think Jeff Brom's a really good coach, so I'm really excited to see how this program develops in the future.
Yeah, and then there was 2 South Carolina teams in action. One had a little bit more fun, and South Carolina, being that team, has the opportunity to get back into the AP poll and the upcoming college football playoff rankings with a game against number 24 Vanderbilt in Nashville this Saturday. Truthfully, you could have fooled me. But, Vandy...
We're going to Broadway.
Not the typical Vandy team we've seen South Carolina play, Spencer.
No, South Carolina typically beats up on Vanderbilt. As you can see there, they've won 15 straight games versus the Commodore, which doesn't sound right, but it is. I mean, this team really has the number of this team in gold and black. But again, Vanderbilt under Clark Lee, this is the best they've looked in maybe 100 years.
Yeah. Well, it's their best start, I think, to a season, or the latest in a season they've been ranked in quite some time.
Absolutely. As Diego Pavia is really impressive. He does it all for this team. The leading passer, the leading rusher, 19 total touchdowns. But it's going to be really interesting when he runs into this buzzsaw of a defense like South Carolina.
Yeah, truthfully, he's played Texas, he's played Alabama. He really hasn't faced a defense that's as good as South Carolina's, especially when it comes to getting to the quarterback and harassing a quarterback who maybe likes to keep it a little bit more mobile.
Yeah, but one thing to note, Vanderbilt has had one of the most weird seasons ever. They played Texas close, barely beat Alabama, but you lose to Missouri in overtime. You lose to Georgia State. And, it's just such an up and down season. It's going to be interesting to see how kind of their chaos plays against South Carolina, who's also had, their fair share of close games, but also big wins and a big loss. It's really, I think this one could be interesting. South Carolina, I think, should come away with the victory, and that's what you've got to be telling yourselves, that you got to go in and look for a dominant performance, get into that top 25 poll, and I think there's an argument they should have been in it this week after a huge win against who was, first in the SEC, Texas A&M. But we'll digress off that. I think this one could be fun.
I agree completely. And, with two teams that are so random, one time, sometimes they look awesome, sometimes they look terrible, is it possible that we get both teams that actually look awesome? I feel like every time we have a matchup of teams that are very hot and cold, usually
one's
one
hot,
team.
one's cold.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be cool if both South Carolina and Vandy were at the peak of their voodoo powers for this one, because it could end up being the best game of the season if so.
That'd be really fun, but of course that's not the only game we're going to talk about. Here's what we'll be tuning into this weekend. We've got 6 more games for you in Week 11. Starting off, it's number 5, Texas versus Florida. This one's going to be an interesting game. We've seen Florida be really competitive kind of recently, but in Austin, not sure.
It'll be interesting if DJ Lagway's healthy. If he's not, then there's really no reason to tune in.
Yeah, the Gator Yale transfer quarterback wasn't quite getting it done against Georgia. Not sure if he'll have any success against Texas.
No, and then you move on, staying in the SEC to the 3:30 ABC game, where as number 16 Ole Miss will host number 2 Georgia. Spencer, you got to think at one point Ole Miss has to win one of these types of games.
They're a 2-loss team, but if they want to keep their hat in the college football playoff, even conversation, you've got to beat Georgia this week. If you fall to 3 losses, I don't think there's any way you can. If they fall to 3 losses and get in the college football playoff, we'll be having another conversation.
Yeah.
But again, this is a huge game for the Rebs at home. Moving on, it's number 21 Colorado taking on Texas Tech. With so many top-ranked Big 12 teams losing, Colorado has a kind of a golden alley opened up as they only have 1 conference loss.
Yeah, they do, but this Texas Tech team, they've faltered a little bit at times, but coming off of a big win at number 10 Iowa State yesterday, man, they're a team that could be getting hot at the right time and could find themselves in the race for the Big 12. Morton is a great quarterback, but for the first time ever, Texas Tech has kind of a running game and a decent defense. So I think anything is possible.
Times have changed.
Lubbock should be, rocking this weekend. I'm excited for that one.
For sure.
And then, maybe the biggest game of the day in terms of it's a playoff eliminator.
It's College Game Day.
College Game Day. Number 14, LSU, is hosting number 11, Alabama, 7:30 on ABC. The Tigers, the Crimson Tide in Death Valley.
We've seen these two teams play in classics for the last 20 years. It should be fun. That's what we're expecting, and we expect nothing else. Moving on, number 19 Clemson heads to Virginia Tech. Not sure if they'll have drones under center again.
We did skip that one for some reason.
But we went a little out of order on the time slot in our sheet. But you know what? It's been a busy day. We had hockey this morning, man.
And then I got a ring that I've been wearing.
This ring ceremony. It's been a long one, but hey, where else would we be on a Sunday night? But again, Virginia Tech, Blacksburg, always an awesome environment. Clemson, their season also kind of on the line. If they lose, you got to think they're really out of the race, and that would be another ACC loss for them.
It would, and it would be very bad, I think, for them, losing to a Virginia Tech team that has been very disappointing this year, especially if Kyron Jones doesn't play. This is a game that on paper people thought was going to be one of the biggest games in the nation. It really has lost its luster. Then our final game, the Holy War has been reignited, and the Utah Utes are going to look to ruin BYU's season at 10-10 in Salt Lake City.
And I was about to say, sorry to interrupt you, my friend, but really this is the Utah Utes season. Yeah, they might make a bowl game. Things have fallen off the rails.
People are talking about Kyle Whittingham retiring.
And he just might. But again, this offense has looked stagnant. They've not had a good year. But if there's one time to do something out in Rice-Eccles Stadium, it is this weekend to knock off your arch rival.
Who nobody likes.
Nobody likes. But it would put a gaping hole in the BYU's playoff chances. And frankly, that would be awesome.
It would. I agree.
It's a great rivalry.
Yeah,
it's going to be awesome. It's got
we don't have to sell it any more than it already does.
No, it's the Holy
sell
War.
itself.
That's right.
But not to say that you should leave. Don't go anywhere. We've got even more sports news coming up after this commercial.
And unfortunately, JP, we're already approaching the end of the college football season, but let's preview who we think is going to make the playoffs. Again, this is just our first prediction. I'd assume we're gonna do this a bunch more times throughout the way. JP, you want to start?
Yeah, well, with the rankings coming out on Tuesday, it's very unfortunate that our new time slot has caused us to miss these playoff rankings. But
senior semester is just
it's taking away our soul. But we've picked who we think will win each conference right now, and then who we think will make it as a wild card. For me, in the ACC, I got Miami. In the Big Ten, I have the Oregon Ducks. In the Big 12, I have the Kansas State Wildcats.
Woo!
I think they just continue to kind of get it done and deal with teams on ground and pound, baby. In the SEC, a little bit of a controversial pick as well. I think A&M responds well to the adversity that they've suffered recently. When they lost to Notre Dame, they bounced back really hard. When they lost to South Carolina, we'll see. They have a nice, manageable schedule before their big home date with Texas to end the year with just one conference loss still. Group of 5 auto bid, I think, goes to the Boise State Broncos. Ashton Jeanty is my Heisman Trophy winner. And then my 7 other teams I think will make it. I think Georgia, they just deal with it enough. They'll be there. Ohio State is another team. I think that they'll just, barely either miss out on the Big Ten title game or lose it.
The committee loves the Buckeyes, though.
They do.
They love Ohio State.
I think Notre Dame holds on to the rest of their schedule. They're 25-point favorites against Florida State. Then they play Virginia, and then Army, and then Southern Cal, who's 4-5. I think the Texas Longhorns are, pretty good, and they'll hang on. Although I think they do lose to A&M, which costs them a spot in the SEC title game. Then I think BYU, the loser of the Big 12 title game, will get in. I think they do either have one loss or are undefeated going into that Big 12 title game. Tennessee, I just think their schedule is light enough and their defense is good enough to where
they have a really good defense.
Yeah, they'll somehow sneak in. And then my kind of fun pick, I think Army loses a close one to Notre Dame and runs roughshod over everyone else so much that they sneak into that final spot.
And that would be really awesome to see. Of course, I'm hoping for Navy to beat Army, and we just won't even have to care about it. But they lost to Rice, so who knows what's happening up there in Annapolis. For my picks, I'm also rocking with the Canes in the ACC and the Ducks in the Big Ten. But for the Big 12, I'm picking Colorado, man. Again, they only have one conference loss. They've looked like a new team in the last couple weeks of the season. I think this team is really fun. They've got stars on both sides of the ball. And if they stay healthy, I think this team could pull off some magic in a Big 12 title game, maybe against the BYU Cougars, and maybe just make the college football playoff. And I think that would just be must-watch TV. For the SEC, I think the Longhorns get it done. I think likely they'll end up with a wild card team I have in there, Georgia, rematching. I think Texas will get the better of them in their second game. But who's to say? There's still a lot of season left, which is why, of course, these predictions will probably get a little more accurate as time goes by.
Yeah.
But I also have the Group of 5 team, the Boise State Broncos. Ashton Jeanty, also my Heisman as of right now. He's awesome. And for my 7 wild cards, I've got Indiana. I think they're really good. And really, if they show up against Ohio State, even in a close loss, I could see them getting a nod. Georgia, I think, probably will find a way to eke out wins the rest of the way and just be good enough even if they lose in the SEC title game. Ohio State, again, the committee loves them. I don't love this team, but their offensive line, which I thought was a huge weakness, looked great against Penn State. So I think that's a big thing to watch out for. BYU, I think, sneaks in. Tennessee, again, kind of a cupcake schedule, really good defense. They're going to find a way in with maybe 1 or 2 losses. Notre Dame, I think, has looked really good. They've responded well since the Northern Illinois disaster. And SMU is kind of my dark horse, Dark Mustang. Come on, dude.
Oh!
I mean, they look really good, man. Even if they get a second loss, if it's to a Miami team, I think the committee might look fondly upon them. But I think they're so fun to watch. They have a dynamic offense. Their defense looked really good, especially in the first half against Pitt, who looked unstoppable. But, I mean, college football is not where this show's going to end, man. We've got something big happening on Monday.
We do. Hey, some of you may remember that this show was founded on college basketball coverage, and college basketball tips off on Monday. We picked some of the must-watch teams in the high majors and mid-major conferences that we're going to be following this year. We're going to run through it right now.
Let's take a look at the graphic first.
Well, yeah, I mean,
that's sweet.
It's pretty. So starting in the ACC, I mean, I'm biased, of course, but I think Notre Dame.
Irish.
I think the Irish. They're a team that got a lot better as the year went on last year. They upset some teams. They still have one of the best defenses in college basketball. Marcus Burton, one of the best point guards in the ACC. And they brought in a lot in the transfer portal. And I mean, the recruiting has been absurd. They have the number 3 class for next year. They just went on the road and beat a team that won their conference and won 23 games by 40 in an exhibition.
What team was that?
That was the Purdue Fort Wayne Mastodons, but hey, they're top 150 in KenPom, yeah. And I think the Irish have a definite shot to kind of position themselves in the middle class of the ACC. Then in the Big Ten, I think Oregon is a new addition to the conference, and they'll be a new addition to the NCAA tournament. I think they're a very fun team under Dana Altman. And
Do
really,
they still have 27-year-old Jermaine Cousinard?
I think they genuinely might. I don't know. We'll wait for that horrific
that
realization.
That was kind of a joke question. If he's
I don't
still
know.
there.
I don't know, man.
He's a bucket. I got to give it to him.
I mean, but hey, they'll always have just this random 7'1" NBA prospect at center. But I think that they're primed to feast on the Big Ten, which really might not be ready for this infusion of new teams. In the Big 12, I love the Cincinnati Bearcats. I think they're going to be very fun to watch. A very hard-nosed team that plays defense. And, I really enjoy the brand of basketball they bring. And they were really good as the season wound down in the Big 12 last year.
They were on our Bubble Watch last year.
They were.
Fans might remember that infamous segment that will definitely be coming back come tournament time.
Oh, they will. It's one of my personal favorites. Then in the Big East, I mean, the defending NIT champions.
Doesn't have his socks on.
I don't. This is from the hockey game.
Are those Sharks?
Yeah, they are Sharks.
Pretty cool, dude. Pretty cool.
The Seton Hall Pirates, I mean, they're a team that's been kind of forgotten about in the pecking order of the Big East. Everyone's picking, obviously UConn, Villanova, and all that. Marquette, very good. St. John's, $1 million in the transfer portal. But a lot of people are into Xavier, Butler, Georgetown. People are forgetting
about the Pirates.
The Pirates who won 25 games last year. Yes, they lost a lot, but it's Shaheen Holloway. You cannot afford to count him out. The Pirates, they're going to swashbuckle. They're going to fight, swing, slash, and crawl their way into every game. They're going to make your life miserable on the court for 48 minutes, and 40 minutes. I can't wait. Then in the SEC, I don't really enjoy watching any of these teams, but I think Florida's kind of fun. They have tall guys, Micah Handlogton, and then that 7'5"
They have tall guys.
Freshman. Yeah. And they run the only fun offensive system in the SEC. Then my mid-majors, I'm a huge St. Joe's guy. I love Eric Reynolds II. He's one of my favorite players. Staying in the A-10, I love VCU, the Rams. They're a very fun team. The A-10 as a whole is my favorite mid-major conference. But my favorite mid-major team is the short-haired dogs, the Wofford Terriers from up the road in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Man, they've got something special. Corey Tripp, Kyler Filowich, one of the best two-man groups in the mid-major ranks. They were awesome last year. They have their highest preseason KenPom rating since 2011, and I think they're primed to make a lot of noise in the SoCon.
Dude, that was awesome. That fired me up about the short-haired dogs. I think there's probably 2 viewers who know any of the people you just named.
Oh, I know them.
But yeah, case in
Michael
point.
Jackson.
Moving on to shout out those guys first. Moving on to my picks in the ACC, I'm going to pick UNC again. There's a little bias there, but also I think UNC is going to be a lot of fun because they retain R.J. Davis and bring in one of the most exciting true freshmen, Ian Jackson, who in an exhibition game tried to kill someone with a 360 windmill dunk, something crazy. He threw his body on the line. It was awesome. In the Big Ten, man, Rutgers, 2 true freshmen who are just awesome. Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper. It's going to be really fun to see what they do.
Well, something that's huge for Rutgers and Notre Dame, they're in the first inaugural NIL preseason invitational thing where Notre Dame and Rutgers in Vegas will be playing against Houston and Alabama, 2 teams in the top 3 of the preseason AP poll. Spencer, I mean that's a one heck of a stage.
Yeah.
Those games will be 10 p.m. tip-offs. Real basketball sickos.
We will be there for the Big 12. Sorry, my voice cracked.
We will be there.
Moving on to the Big 12, I'm going to go with Iowa State. I think they're a team that's already built for the tournament. They play lockdown defense. They bring back Taman Lipsey. And they really don't have to score that much to get it done. But I think if they find some scoring as the season goes on, they're going to be a team to watch to maybe bring home the title. For the Big East, on my sheet, I wrote down St. John's. But I put UConn up because, again,
True.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see if this team can three-peat and what it looks like. They lost a lot of the guys that contributed to the 2 huge runs they've had. In the SEC, again, I had a really hard time picking a team just because I think it's a really open conference. There's been a lot of changes. But in that way, I think it's going to be interesting to see who kind of fills the top dog role. I think Auburn is going to be one of those teams. They bring back Janai Broom, who I think is awesome. And
they're a great regular season team under Bruce Pearl.
They
have had those struggles in the tournament at times, which the entire SEC has because the SEC plays untenable basketball. But hey,
apparently true.
We'll be in. I think Arkansas could be very fun. It's a deep conference in competition with themselves. I don't think it's a deep conference in competition with the rest of the country, much less like the Big East and the Big 12. But I think that they're definitely – the SEC-ACC challenge is going to be very interesting this year because there are some very favorable matchups for the SEC on paper. We'll see how they play because games aren't played on paper. As much as we love Ken Palm and analytics
they're played on the court. That's right. But for my 3 mid-major teams to watch it, again, I've been riding the Boise State hype train in football. Same for basketball. They returned so much talent. I think they're probably the favorites to win the Mountain West. Considering San Diego State lost so much, I keep an eye on those guys to really have a dominant regular season and make noise in the tournament.
And they have a big-time home game versus the Clemson Tigers, who went to the Elite Eight last year. It's not often a mid-major team gets a high-major team coming off such great success to come to their place.
Plus, that would be a marquee win for Boise State. That's the problem for a lot of mid-major teams at the end of the year. They just don't play enough good teams to really, or they don't beat them, to have some of those resume-defining moments. That's a huge one for the Broncos. In the A-10, I've got Dayton. I think Dayton's going to have a really good year. They had some success last year. You just think, they're building something, and I really just like the way that they play basketball. They had the same coach for a long time. Am I not mistaken in that?
No, yeah.
I forget his
Archie Miller?
On his name.
I believe so.
I think you're right. We were robbed of a Dayton tournament run in the COVID year with Obi Toppin. But again, they're just building a nice program up there. And you could pick a ton of A-10 teams, and I think they're going to be one to watch.
It's going to be, we never even mentioned George Mason or Loyola Chicago, or St. Louis.
That's right.
There's a lot of talent in that conference.
Took the entire Indiana State roster, and they're going to run with it back. And that team just missed the tournament. Played Seton Hall in the NIT final. My last mid-major to watch is going to be Princeton. Those boys in the Ivy League are hooping. They got, I forget the big-time transfer they got, but Xavier Lee is awesome.
They really only lost one guy to the portal, Matt Aloko, who went to Notre Dame. But,
yeah.
They're a team that really sticks together, and they have NBA scouts going to practice and stuff. You'd love to see that in the Ivy League, and guess what? Princeton versus St. Joe's at Princeton. I think it's December 12th. Cinema.
You know what?
Tune
if
your
you
dials.
got your calendar out that far, go ahead and give that a circle.
Man,
JP,
block off your whole day.
JP, other than you getting the ring today, moment of the Sunday. Earlier today, we watched Ice Bryce Young do his thing and lead the Panthers to their 2nd win of the season. When I tell you it was emotional, dude, it fired me up. I saw Bryce Young smile for the first time in weeks. He looked amazing today. 16 for 26, 176 yards and a touchdown. He did get credit for an interception that wasn't really his fault. It was a dot to Xavier Leggett who had it stripped from him, and it technically goes down as an int. But again, I thought Bryce Young was awesome. He was playing with confidence. And David Moore dropped a touchdown pass that would have added about 40 yards and another touchdown to his stat line. But again, he led the team on the field today, and it was beautiful.
That's the best I've ever seen Bryce Young look on an NFL field. It's not even, I'm not being hyperbolic. This is not the Bryce Young we saw in week 2. And yes, the Saints are bad, but we saw Bryce Young play the Saints in week 1, and he looked like the worst NFL quarterback since Jamarcus Russell or since Daniel Jones. But,
Take your pick.
Even though, his mechanics looked like a little weird. It seemed like every time he threw it, he was throwing it with all his might. But, man, it was just, you got to do what you got to do. I think something he's learned in the benching and kind of watching Andy Dalton is that it doesn't have to be perfect every time. You just got to survive to the next play, man.
Give your guy a chance. He did a great job of navigating the pocket today.
He did.
He really did.
When he scrambled to get the ball right onto the 1 yard line to set up Chuba's touchdown to give us the lead.
Gutsy.
I mean, it's just stuff like that. He's kind of getting that savvy, and they have a great opportunity to start stacking some W's starting on Sunday against the worst quarterback in the NFL.
And the JP, I guess, has credibility to say that as a Giants fan. 9:30 in the morning next Sunday, the Panthers and the Giants, they don't meet in America, they meet in Germany.
You may be wondering what the Germans did to deserve that. Well, you probably know. I don't need to say it.
We'll leave that unsaid. But JP, that's all we've got for him today. We'll be right back after this week's Pick'ems. With this week's Pick'ems, not after. We haven't done Pick'ems yet, but we will right after the break.
Welcome back to BDL Pick'ems. I've got 41 wins and 30 losses on the season, while Spencer is pulling ahead with a 46-25 record. I'm a fraud. Well, let's just run through the NFL games as we have on Sunday Night Football. It's the Indianapolis Colts heading to the Minnesota Vikings. Spencer, who do you got?
I'm taking the Vikings. It's a home game at night for Minnesota. They've been cooking up crazy blitzes all season long with Brian Flores. And frankly, I love Flacco. Love Joe Flacco at quarterback. I think it gives the Colts a better chance to win right now, but I think the Vikings just have a little bit more in the tank.
It was always Joe Flacco, yeah. It was always Joe Flacco.
Can't argue with
That's
that.
why the Colts are going to win tonight, yeah. Anyway, Monday Night Football
Apparently, yeah.
Features the Tampa Bay Buccaneers traveling to Arrowhead to take on a pretty weirdly performing Chiefs team in terms of their offense. Spencer, who do you got in this one?
They're performing weirdly, but they're winning, and they're winning a lot. And they added DeAndre Hopkins, who I think had a nice debut for them, even in his old age. Tennessee just frankly can't run an offense. So I think
putting on that Titans jersey, it removes talent from your body. We saw it with Randy Moss, T.O.
I mean, Julio Jones went there.
Oh, God.
Whatever happened? Everything goes to die in Tennessee. So I think, he brings a lot of flexibility to this team. They finally have a big body receiver to pair with the speedier Xavier Worthy. The Chiefs get it done at home. Frankly, the Buccaneers without their two best receivers is going to be tough.
It's going to be tough, but I think someone like Baker Mayfield is the guy to do it. I think Baker Mayfield.
He's a warrior.
He's a warrior. He's a warrior poet, and I think he goes there. And you know that picture of the pirate riding, and it really looks really funny? That's Baker Mayfield writing the script to a glorious Buccaneers victory in Arrowhead.
Yeah, and I don't mean to spoil Pick'ems, but me and JP don't exactly agree on today's slate.
No.
Huge record parity coming next week. I either pull ahead or JP overtakes me. We will see. But moving on to college football, the Gamecocks head to Broadway to take on number 24 Vandy. JP, who you rocking with?
I think this game is good in the first half at least. But it would not shock me if South Carolina makes some adjustments, shuts down Pavia like they did Marcel Reed, and the Gamecocks do kind of maybe handle this one like 37-27 or 37-23, something like that. I think South Carolina will be able to run the ball very well against this Vandy team. Shade Beamer has never lost to the Commodores. South Carolina hasn't lost to Vanderbilt in 15 years.
Let's not start now.
No.
I'm also picking the Gamecocks. I think one thing you saw early, A&M loaded the box to try and stop the run early. The Gamecocks actually didn't look afraid to pass in the first half, and it worked out well, especially when you get Sellers on the move. Bring more attention to him, and he'll throw over top of you, man. Lenore's really impressed me yesterday. I think the Gamecocks get it done. Florida at number 5, Texas.
Oh, Jesus.
This is one we do agree on. We're both taking the Longhorns, and I don't think it's going to be a surprise.
You know the scene in The Waterboy when he finds that gator? That's what's going to happen in Austin.
Oh, man. Oh. I mean, yeah, go Texas, man. They get it done, I think. Number 2 UGA heads to Oxford, and number 16 Ole Miss. JP, tell me who you're going with here.
This is out of character for me. But at some point, Ole Miss has to win one of these games. Georgia's been playing with a lot of fire. They're getting away with a lot of interceptions, a lot of turnovers because the other team's quarterback has not been good enough to make them pay for it. Jackson Dart is good enough to make them pay for it. At some point, Ole Miss has to win one of these games, and if not now, when? I think they get the dub over the Dogs in Oxford this Saturday.
And for me, it's if not now, never. And they don't get it done. Georgia steps up against better teams, but they frankly kind of manhandled Texas. And they played Bama right down to the wire, mounting an incredible comeback. just fell a little short. I think they handle business on the road and prove that they're one of the top 2 SEC teams in this conference. Number 21, Colorado, heads on to Lubbock for a big-time Big 12 matchup. I'm rolling with the Buffs here.
I'm rolling.
Dion rolls into town and gets her done.
I'm going Red Raiders, man. Guns up. I think they're going to ride through. And truthfully, I think Colorado's defense is just not prepared for what they're going to run into. It's going to be a rowdy environment. That place, back in the day when Mike Leach was there, it was one of the toughest places to play in college football. That is a passionate and insane fan base. You give them a You give them a smattering of success, like beating a number 10 team on the road in conference play. They're going to come out for their team, and I think they come out in droves. And I just don't think I think Colorado, Shadur Sanders is going to be running for his life.
He might. I think it's going to be a fun one. I've got the Buffs
It definitely will be
taking
fun.
it close.
Like 47-44 final.
Ooh, that would just be prime Big 12. Moving on to our game day matchup of the week. It's number 11, Bama, on the road at number 14, LSU in Death Valley.
Both teams coming off byes. Both teams desperate for a win. They need it, or they're likely eliminated from the playoffs. Before Nick Saban retired, I don't think I ever picked Bama to lose to LSU. It just never, even when it did happen, it never seemed like it would happen in a million years.
Didn't feel right.
Brian Kelly's beaten Alabama already once, and that was when Saban was there with Bryce Young, a much better Alabama team.
Oh, Ice Bryce.
I think Nussmeier and company air it out, man. I think they do. Ooh. And I don't know. It's not a blowout, but also I think Bama just they get it going late. They just can't go toe-to-toe with the aerial power of LSU.
Alabama played their best game of the season last week against Missouri. They didn't play yesterday, but again, this team's well-rested. I think they head to Death Valley and keep their college football playoff hopes alive and take down Nussmeier, because once we saw against Texas A&M, if Nussmeier gets rattled, he kind of stays rattled. He really, don't want to say he lost them the game because his defense didn't do him any favors against Marcel Reed, but he really looked quite bad after he started throwing some turnovers. I think Bama wreaks a little havoc and gets away with one at Death Valley. Moving on to the Holy War.
Here's what we are in agreement on.
At Utah. Throw up the Utes, baby. I don't know what their signal is, but
I think it's literally this.
Okay, well, we're holding up a U for them because we're not picking BYU.
Nope.
Those fraudulent BYU kids win every game
put it
in
on
last
for the
possession.
Yeah, they put it on for 8th-year senior Cam Rising. They're going to carry him off the field like Rudy when he goes in to take a knee.
His injured pinky will resurface once again.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, moving on to what we thought was going to be a fun matchup. It doesn't look quite as illustrious, but still important nonetheless. Number 19, Clemson heads on the road to Blacksburg. JP, are we both rocking with the Tigers? I think we are.
I am. I think that Clemson takes care of business. It's a tough environment, but Virginia Tech, every time they've had momentum this season, they've tripped up and fallen.
And it seems to be at the last step, too.
Yeah.
They get every game close, and there's a woo, woo, woo.
They had Vanderbilt beat. They had Rutgers beat. They had Syracuse beat. They had Miami beat on a Hail Mary. All 4 of their losses are just inexplicably horrible. And if I was a Virginia Tech fan, this would be a season of horror and nightmares. But I'm not, and I think Clemson beats them.
I think so, too. I think Clemson's going to bring a little too much, and especially with Drones' health up in the air, really not sure.
Yeah.
And moving on to easily the funniest pick'em of them all, a game we didn't talk about once. It's a surprise. Michigan's unranked. High five. Yep. They go on the road to Bloomington to take on Indiana, and if all is right and justice still exists in this world, the Hoosiers will beat them by 700.
It's true. This is the first time in the last 43 meetings that Michigan has been a betting underdog against the Indiana Hoosiers. And guess what, baby? The meme used to be 9-win Indiana. Now, prepare to tell your children about 10-win Indiana, and the Hoosiers are going to beat Michigan.
Hey, you can Google it after. 70-0 final score. That's going to do it for this episode of Ball Don't Lie. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, X, and TikTok at SGTV at USC.
To keep up with all of our content, be sure to also visit us online at sgtv@usc.com. For SGTV, I'm JP Barry.
And I'm Spencer Ball. From all of us here at SGTV, have a great week, Carolina.
Forever to thee.